Okay, so where have we been? We created our post model and created this component post that we just played around with. So I'm going to delete this again. So now we want to look into routing, right? So as you remember, we created two models. One is post and one is tag. And I'm going to close all of this stuff here and start with an API. So what I'm going to do is to basically say, okay, neoan3 new component, and now this one I'm going to call post, and I'm going to do TAPI, which basically is just a shortcut. So you don't need to do this, but then it stops asking me what kind of component it is. I say like, well, it is an API from the start, right? So now this post was created. It will look a little bit different than what we initially saw, and this will basically tell us how routing works, right? So the component post, what it basically does is we write get, that would be the method, the request method, and then post, which is simply the name of the component itself, right? It's post. So get post is now available, and then we have a couple of parameters here. So I'm going to actually get rid of all of this just to make it simple and say, okay, what do we have here, right? This will scream at me a little bit, but I'm going to ignore all of this and say, hey, let's do something super simple and say return some endpoint. Oops. Okay, just a regular array. Now, what will this enable? This will make it possible to have a get request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Postman like this, launch this right here, and create a new call. It's going to be a get call. So I'm going to do this against my HTTP. Actually, this is already almost perfect. So I'm going to say localhost 8080, that's where my def runs, /API.v1, that is for the API routing, and then I'm going to do post. Now, if I fire this, here you can see it nicely, right? Can I switch this over to dark mode? Well, doesn't matter right now. But here you can basically nicely see that we now basically have exactly this result as a JSON, right? So I already created a JSON API just by that. And if we look closer into this, so let's ignore the database for now, and say, okay, so just by the existence of get post in my post controller, I have this post endpoint. Now, if I change, let's say I'm going to make this a put, right, and send it, then ironically, and this is how, yeah, this is a little bit strange how Postman reacts, but you can see there's a 405 method not allowed, right, method put not supported at this endpoint, and so I don't have a put. If I were to create it, right, if I were to say, hey, function put post, right, and then return hi there, and then fire it again, then you can see I see this hi there, and I have a 200 response. See that? So that's how routing works on a very high level. I just basically say, okay, what kind of method, and then just the name of the component itself. So what about parameters and bodies and all that kind of stuff, right? So the first thing that we want to do is we probably want to look at the post. So you can see that the post receives a body, and this is a non-conditional body, right? So if I were to say, hey, I actually want to post against this, so now this function should fire, right? Then I say there's an error, request is empty, right? See that 400 bad request is empty. Of course, if I say, hey, you know what, my body is optional, right? And fire against it there, then this will work just fine. I mean, it's going to be empty now. The result will be empty, but I have a 200 OK. Now, the only thing I'm doing here is I'm returning the body directly, right? So if I were to go to body and say, okay, I want to, I'm not sure how this works here, raw and JSON in that case, and I'm going to say test me and send that, then this is what I get returned. Okay, so that is number one for routing. And of course I can have multiple parameters here. So I could, for example, say, hey, there is something else here. I'm going to call string type, and that equals null. Right, then why is it, that's unused, okay. Right, so this still works just like a charm. But what I can also do now is I just made this deep, right? So what I could do is basically here say like, hey, this does not only return body, but I also say like body type equals type. Oops. Okay, so in my response, the type is null, as you can see. But if I now say like, okay, post, and I'm going to say comment, then you will see that the type is filled with comment, and that's pretty useful for stuff like update and gets and all that kind of stuff, depending on what kind of structure you plan for your REST API. I mean, there are particular principles that you want to adhere to, but I'm not going to jump into that right now. The only thing that I want to talk to you about is like the technical capabilities. Now, we've already created our post model, right? And now we have a post controller, so now we have a post API. So let's just assume the following, right? Oh, and by the way, if I take this out, and this is now not available anymore, what will happen is if I actually shoot it against /comment, then it will actually return, where is it? Will return an error, right? This will not work, and I don't catch the type of route error as of now, which is a little bit of a problem here. But let's ignore that. So that doesn't exist. But if I remove it, right, then I get my result back. So what I want to do here is to basically say, hey, this is supposed to actually generate an actual post. So we already learned that basically, as long as body comes into the right format, I can do whatever I want, right? So I can't really break it, other than, you know, generating any kind of errors. I can't really ruin my database. So what I can of course do now is to say, okay, this load model, and then I'm going to say post model class create, and then I'm going to say body, right? And then at the beginning I have a return statement, so the creation of this already is directly returned. Now let's try this out. So as you remember, right, our post has a title and content, and content is nullable as far as I remember. So in theory, I could probably say title post via API and send that. And as you can see, it returns now the new post, right? Which is, where's pretty? Ugh, this is so strange. Okay. Which basically returns this ID, the insert date, delete date, you know, all that kind of stuff that was done here with the content null in that case. And that's all fine. Now let's create our put and say, hey, our put has an ID, right, and a body. And then here say, okay, so I can more or less just steal this here. And here I'm going to say update. And I'm going to ignore this ID for now. No, I'm not going to ignore this ID for now. Yeah, no, I'm going to ignore this for now because we're going to go into authentication, stuff like that. So let's for now just say like, hey, I can update whatever. So I'm going to go over. So I'm going to take the result from the last call, place that into here, and instead of content null, I'm going to say some content. Okay, change this over to put and shoot. And as you, yeah, I don't. Again, this is acting a little bit strange, but as you can see, my content now is AOME content, and so the update call worked as expected. And last but not least, let's get the ID. Here I'm going to say string ID, where I of course going to say, hey, return, oops, and then get, and then ID. Okay, and this I don't need. And which point I simply can say, okay, let's take now the ID and create a get call. And as you can see now, I get the post out, right? So that's how routing works, and that's how simple it is. So that's how I already have like almost a complete CRUD. I'm basically missing my delete, and that is, you guessed it, delete post, where I'm going to say string ID. Again, I'm not going to worry about authentication right now, so I'm actually really going to say, hey, you know what? Anybody can delete anything. And here I'm going to say delete, and then in that case take this ID. So if I now make changes, so let's switch this over to delete, fire it, and I actually get a arrow. Which is why. Only need an ID, right? Oh, is that because I have the body? Right. Right. Now it says request is empty. Am I not sending this over correctly? So delete string ID. And it says request is empty, which should be fine. Which should be fine. I'm kind of wondering why that's the case right now. What did I do wrong? Delete post. Says request is empty, which should be okay. I have to do it like this, right? Nope. Is this the wrong ID I have? Okay, I actually have to debug this now quickly and see what's going on. All right. No, that was stupid. That's probably simply deleted already. That's probably the issue, right? Oh. Let's actually find this out the easy way. No, the get also doesn't work. Okay. I think something's up with Postman here. Why don't you work anymore? Just for shits and giggles. Okay. Adhere null. Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. Should not be a problem whatsoever. I'm not sure why it behaves this way. Ah. What the? Yeah, I don't know. So ever since Postman switched over, you know, to this extension based, I'm not really sure what's going on with it. But as you can see, now it works. Yep, no idea. No idea. Also, how it basically gets the pretty over. Like, I'm not sure why those problems exist, but that's been a thing for the last couple of days. I hope they have some kind of update soon. Anyway, okay, so that still exists, which basically means our delete didn't work. But I'm going to look into that later. The more important point here is to say, well, so should anybody really be able to do those kind of operations, right? Or do we want to get a security layer in there where we basically decide, well, you know, you should probably only be able to delete your own posts and stuff like that. In order to do that, we want to create a complete new model with a simple user login. Okay, so let's go to our where is it running? Here. Let's go to our system and go to migrate. And nope, first we need a new model. Where do we have something free? Wait, do we have multiple things running here? Okay, that's probably the issue, right? That's probably the issue. Let's clear that. Okay. And then here, we're going to say neoan3 new model user. Okay. And my user model, let me refresh that quickly. My user model will be super primitive for now. It will simply have a username and a password. Let's do it to 200 for now. Okay, let's write this out. Write it to the database. You know the spiel already, neoan3 migrate models up. I'm going to choose my video to be, and then in my database, if I refresh it, I now have a user. Now let's quickly create a user registration logic. So I'm also going to say neoan3 new component user. That is going to be an API, and I'm going to use demo, and I'm going to quickly switch over to that, right? So here I now have user controller, and so pretty simple. Post is going to generate my user, so you kind of remember how that worked, and now it's going to be the interesting part. So the creation of a user itself is of course free of any kind of authentication, so that's just a call we can use, right? So I'm going to do the same thing here and say, okay, so this load model, user model class, and then I'm going to say create body, okay, and I'm going to call this new user. Okay, and this is now where it gets interesting. Okay, so the way I want to identify here is, and we did this in an earlier video, is we set up our Jwt Token provider. So we're going to use a bearer token in order to authenticate against the database and against the backend. And at this point, what we're doing is to say, okay, let's basically do this, right? And say, okay, so this provider auth, and if you don't remember this, right, if we go into frame and go into demo, then we created this provider auth here with the new JWT wrapper. Okay, that's where this comes, and this is basically a sign. And what I'm going to put in here, right, is, so the first parameter is a, or actually, how does this work? Yeah, no, the first parameter is the user ID. So here I'm going to say new user ID, and the second parameter is the scope, and in that case I'm just going to call that read write. Okay, so full access for our, we're not going to work on that level today anyway, right? So whatever. We're going to create this, and that is basically our auth. Okay, and what our auth is a instance of and actually let me show you that so it's easier to understand. So let's quickly create private auth, and that is an auth object. Call this auth object declaration for easier reference. So then here I'd simply say this auth. Okay, so the reason why I'm doing it like that is so if we use the interface, you will kind of like there will be an autocomplete. So I'm going to say now token, and now I can say, okay, this auth, and then in that case get token. All right, so that's now the token. Now I'm going to send the token directly back after registration. Right, that's what I'm going to do. So in the first case, let's basically do that and ignore the rest for now. So here I'm going to go and say, okay, so I'm going to shoot, let's get rid of all of this, against user. This is going to be a post request. And I'm going to create a JSON in here where I say, did we call this username? Yep, just like that. Where I say username, admin, and then I'm going to say password is 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, so before I send this, right, you might wonder what we talked about before, where we say, hey, hold on a second, don't we want to make changes to what password is, right? Because we probably want to save that as a hashed password rather than clear text, and you're absolutely correct. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to user model, and I'm going to simply create my own function and say public static function register. Okay, and in my register, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, my user password, right, is, and then I'm going to say password hash user password, and then password default. How does this work again? This guy. Okay. Right, so now I'm going to generate this hash. Now what I'm also going to do is I assume that this password hash is going to generate something that's going to start with a $, which is something that the underlying DB wrapper we're using is going to interpret as something that it needs to be converted from hex to binary. We don't want to do that for right. We say like whatever this because then we can't later on check it. So however this password hash comes, we really want to insert it as such. So I'm going to simply make an equal sign here. In that case, this will basically eliminate whatever breaking thing would be in here, right? It's kind of like, no, this is really just whatever you have next. And at the end of the day, I'm gonna have a create and return this. Okay, so now I have a register function in my user model. I'm gonna jump back to my user controller, and then of course here say register. Yeah, actual class and passing the argument. Yeah, that's correct. Here I'm going to pass register, and that is going to basically generate that for us. So so far so good. And then we get the token back, and basically we should be happy with this, right? The login itself we're not going to write now because we won't need it. So let's now do one other thing. If you remember our post, right? If we go there, then there's one thing that is abundantly clear. How do I know which post belongs to which user? And it's a very good question. So let me actually create another thing here called user ID that I'm going to say that's a binary 16. Okay, and from now going forward it is not nullable. Okay, going to write that out and then do my neoan3 migrate models up, choose my credentials. Okay, so at this point if we look at the database, post will have changed and now has a user ID. Okay, so first things first. Now let's first get our actual authentication going, right? So I'm going to send a post against user. We prepared this here already with admin and my highly secure password. Now if I shoot that, then what is going on here? There. Don't know what's up with postman. Then what is returned is why is that so strange? Is this token, as you can see, right, which is actually my Jwt token. So I'm going to use this in order to authenticate. So I'm now directly logged in, right? So when I registered, I directly generated this token and basically gave it back. If you want to know more about what a JSON web token is and why that's secure and what stateless means and so on, feel free to explore that. I'm just going to assume that you're familiar enough to be able to feel comfortable with it. So I'm going to copy this token, go to auth, go here to bearer token, paste this in here. Okay, so from now on I have an authentication. You can see how that looks like in the headers somewhere. Here, authorization, authorization, and then here's the bearer token. See that? Okay, so from that moment on we can do this. So now we're going to go back to our post controller and now say, hey, you know what? This post is now something that can only happen if you are logged in. So I'm going to use the same thing here and say, okay, this provider auth, in that case restrict, and my result will again be my auth object, right? So if I send something against this without or with a wrong JWT, right, or an unauthenticated, then this will simply bounce and create a route error. Actually, we're going to try this out. So I'm going to go ahead and say, like, okay, let's go back to create a post, and then quickly go to our body and say title first auth post, and what was the content? Is some content. Oops, some content. Okay, so if I fire against this without any kind of authentication, right, which right now I do have. Did I erase that from the header? I can't. I need to do no here, right? No auth. Okay, and send that against it. Then do you see how I get the error unauthorized, and I get a 404 unauthorized response automatically, right? Nothing else I need to worry about. Now, if I kick this on again, please have saved it. Yes, thank you. Then this will actually work. I'm not going to fire this as of yet, because what I'm going to do first is to say, well, the body itself, right, will have a user ID. We'll have a user ID, and this user ID will be the JWT get user ID. Okay, so you remember that, right? We had this we did this here too. Oops, where's our user controller? This get token, and there are a couple of other of those things, right? If you remember, let me see, right? Get scope, get payload, you know, all that kind of stuff. And the oops, here when I have the get token, and here when I have the get user ID. Now in this very case, I want the user ID to be stored as a binary. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have this $sign here. So if that raises a lot of question marks, go and head over to and probably should put that down in the link, to neoan3 apps.db. Whoops, that's not exactly what I meant, but that'll do. And familiarize yourself with what's going on under the hood. This is how database interactions work, and you can see basically what I'm talking about here. Where are we? Actually, now that I think of it, I don't even think you need to worry about this. We're going to trust the automation. We're going to trust the automation. That should be not something you should worry about in version 3. And now we're going to create the actual post, right? So here's our title. So let's send it against it. Boom. And what we get back here is, see, this is our user ID, by the way, in case you wondered. And this is basically now our new post. And what we are going to do now, and let's say we are going to look at the update. So in the update, let's now do something and say, okay, we actually require a string ID, right? That's something that we need in the put, because what we want to do, right, is a little bit of a strategy here, and say retrieve original. So don't forget, we can't trust what we get back, right? We want to be sure that the user ID that we have in the database is correct. So the first thing that we want to do is the same thing here. So this needs to be an authenticated call, right? Next, we want to say, okay, let's get the post model get of ID, oops, class, and then like this, get ID out of here, right? So this is the original. And what we want to make sure is that the if we say original user ID is the same as the JWT get user ID. Okay? Only then is it cool to update. So in other words, if it's not the case, then you have no right to update this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say throw new route exception, so I can manually invoke those things that automatically come back, right? And I'm going to say unauthorized 404. Okay? So if this is not my post, then I'm not authorized to update it. So far so good. And so what we want to do is, there's just one last check that we need to do, is if he is kind of, this is a security reason, right? We also have to make sure that ID is not body ID or, okay? So naturally we have to make sure that the ID we get in the URL and the actual entity that we want to update is also the same, right? Because that could kind of differ. So let's do that. So this is something that I do want to do. It's back. Yeah, it's because I don't have a doc block. Ugh. Hold on. There we go. Right, so now I'm throwing this route exception. So let's test it through. So I have, this is actually my post, right? So this is what I got back. So I'm going to use this whole shebang here, put that in my body, switch this over to take this ID and place it at the end, right? So we have it here. And I should basically be fine. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, I don't know, first content is, I'm going to change this, right, to changed content. And then fire it. So here I get my changed content back. Everything is fine, right? So now let's try to basically do this with a couple of variables and see where we fail, if I actually wanted to get it to. So the first thing I'm going to try is to say, hey, what if this is wrong, right? What if this is wrong? This is a case we have forgotten about. So if I fire this now, then I get the error unauthorized. See that? And ooh, I need to jump off here in a second. So we basically, what happened now in this case is this original returned nothing basically, right? So user ID isn't even set, so this is not the correct ID. I'm not authorized to change this entity. There could be a difference here, right? So if I get this back and say, okay, no, this is correct, but this ID not. Why can't I? What is up with Postman? And this ID not, so that means this condition throws, right? And of course I again get an unauthorized, right? So I can't get any kind of further. So only if all of those things match, I can actually generate a valid update, and that's how I secure my application. That said, I hope that wasn't too wild, but I know that, you know, when people start with routing and secure routes and so on, that that gets a little bit confusing. You might also wonder, like, well, you know, can't I just generate a middleware for that kind of functionality? The answer is, of course, yes, you can. We're going to look into that when we go into frames, even though it's not exactly what a classical middleware from a technical standpoint. It does exactly that. from a standpoint of understanding, I think you can basically, with where we've gotten today, get to the point of where you are capable of generating any kind of endpoints, and with the models create any kind of interaction that you would need in order to build, for example, this blog we were talking about, which we will look closer into in our next video. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I see you soon.